Hey there, Toonami faithful, and welcome back aboard Toonami Absolution, where we are going to talk to you about some of the shows that made you, well, you, and made us us. So, once again, we are your hosts. My name is Alex.
I'm Sam.
And I'm John. Yes, we're going to be covering Space Ghost.
Coast to
Well,
coast.
Coast
coast
to
to
coast.
coast, not the original, but we'll get to the original. But yes, well, Sam,
Yeah.
why Space Ghost? Like you got
For
you
me,
got to pick our first cartoon.
Space Coast is foundational. Space Coast, I think when Space Coast started, I was like 7 years old. And I remember when they first announced Space Ghost Coast to Coast, I had started out watching Space Ghost and the Galaxy Trio, which was the Hanna-Barbera Space Ghost show from the 60s, where he's very seriously like of that ilk of 60s Hanna-Barbera superheroes like Birdman, who of course shows up, or the Herculoids, or whoever. Um, and so when I saw that Space Ghost was getting his own talk show, I was like, what is going on? Also, Friday nights at 11. And I was, again, I'm like 7 years old. I'm like, who's gonna stay up on a Friday night at till 11 to watch this? Like, what is going on? Because yeah, this predates Toonami. This really sets the bar for Toonami. This predates and sets the bar for Adult Swim by like 6 years. I mean, it's really so for me, starting with Space Ghost Coast to Coast, or having that be one of the things where we were building this off of, it's foundational. It's like it's really where Cartoon Network starts to kind of create its own programming, albeit very lo-fi, lovingly lo-fi, and using the assets that they have as a Warner Brothers subsidiary, which they do a lot. Interestingly enough, I mean, we're going to be talking really more about the proof of concept videos that were never released to the public uncut. One wasn't released at all. That really kind of begat Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
That
Yeah, I mean, what was your memories of Space Ghost?
that pilot episode, I like we'll talk about that in a minute, but I grew up in an insomniac kind of household where both my parents and I were often up very late, and my dad and I loved finding weird sci-fi stuff. And Space Ghost Coast to Coast, when it first came on, we neither one of us had any idea what it was about. We just saw it coming on, and we just sat together and watched it. And the first episode I remember seeing is the Gilligan's Island episode, and I
Oh,
had just started watching Gilligan's Island with my grandma. And it was a weird sort of coincidence. And I knew when I heard that like slamming guitar that something good was about to come on. And boy, oh boy, that guitar rocked. But man, that pilot. But yeah, what about you, John? What
I
memories?
I remember Space Ghost, but it was one of those shows, which if you guys have these as well, that you're unsure if they are dreams or not.
I have a couple
Because
like that.
I remember seeing bits of this, but like, well, then years later I'd go and look it up. I was like, oh, it was Space Ghost, and I'd find, oh, it was an actual cartoon. I must have made this up in my head or got two things mixed up. It wasn't until many years later I realized what the show was. So I've seen a lot of bits of it. I think most of the time I saw was later because
mhm.
going back to some of these, obviously a lot of these people I didn't know. You'll pretty much pick up the first person on this run who I know of in any depth is Timothy Leary, which I'm
Hmm.
not sure if what that says about my upbringing. Um, but yeah, it was very weird. Just for some context as well, as you were saying, Sam, for the 11 o'clock slot, if you look at the old Cartoon Network listings, pretty much the second it hits 10 p.m., they're just rerunning old Acme shorts. They're just until 6. That's all they're doing is rerunning and rerunning. This was like one of the first Cartoon Network originals with like, well, let's do something with this late night slot and not just show the same 6 cartoons over and over again.
And the cool thing about Space Ghost Coast to Coast is that it really creates Toonami as a whole. Like before Tom, it was Moltar who was running Toonami with his lever that we didn't really know what the lever did. But
It did
it's
everything. It did
interesting.
everything because all he would pull it and whatever he was trying to do, like psychically, it would just know.
It was just really interesting and I have to appreciate the creativity of something like Space Ghost, where you're taking these very old cartoons and recutting them into something very very new and cool. And I think a lot of millennial humor kind of came out of this style. I think Space Ghost Coast to Coast ended up informing things like a bridge series that would be coming out on YouTube much later. Like there's a lot of genuine creativity that goes into a project like this.
Oh, we'll get to it next week, but I would argue that one of the first Space episodes has what I would call the prototypical Adult Swim joke. Like, if you sort of get Adult Swim's comedy and distill it down to its bare bones, it is that joke. Yeah, just for the context, we're going to be talking about the pilots today. There were two of them. The first one was made in April 1993. It is now called Andy's Pilot because it wasn't released until November 2004 as a DVD extra, but it uses footage of Denzel Washington from CNN's Showbiz Today. And as the law goes, it would have cost Cartoon Network 25 grand to license it. They said no. So it's on the DVD with all the footage cut. The name is censored quite heavily, which makes it fun. I'm not even sure if that's true because I think the episode is funnier because of the just rampant censorship. And the second pilot we're going to cover hasn't been released. Apparently, it was kind of a promo run because it does feature Space Ghost kind of saying, "Hey, my show is coming."
Yeah, yeah. So in the case of the first episode, the first pilot, if you have Space Ghost Coast to Coast Volume 2 on DVD, it's one of the special features where it's listed as Andy's pilot because after Andy Merrill, who voices Brack, and in that episode voices Space Ghost, um, you can kind of hear like Denzel and some of the incidental like dialogue or someone that sounds like Denzel. Yeah, and there's also I want to say he was promoting Malcolm X at the time, which is just like the weirdest juxtaposition of I mean the entire thing is that's what the beauty of Space Ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in '93, he would have just come off Malcolm X, and that year, like a couple of months before this is the date of April, he would have just released Much Ado About Nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those two.
Fun fact about Denzel Washington, my mom went to college with him and saw the only other production of Othello that he was in it when they went to college together. So they didn't know each other, but she was like, I already saw Othello. I don't need to see it on Broadway.
Oh, yeah, and she already saw it with Denzel, so frankly, it doesn't get much better acting than that.
I mean, you know
Have
the
some
ending now
deep
as
lore
well.
from Alex.
Yeah.
It is weird the clips they chose for the Denzel Washington one because it's basically him ragging on the Oscars ceremony, and it's more mean spirited than Space Ghost would be. I get why they picked it because it makes it funnier when Space Ghost immediately brushes it off with that's funny.
Yeah.
But it's just weirdly aggressive, this one interview to choose.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's whatever, like you were saying, it's from an old CNN interview, so it's part of the Warner Brothers family. So you can play around and tinker with that. And it's just like, okay, how do we like because there's no way actual Academy Award winner, multiple Academy Award winner Denzel I was always curious watching this as a kid and frankly watching it now where I'm like, what was the publicist like? How do you pitch that to a publicist? Like, would you like to come on this show? I mean, for something like Gilligan's Island or the Bee Gees, it makes sense because they're not exactly at their prime when they come to Space Ghost. But you get some very interesting people that are still very much like in the throes of their success. I can only wonder what
It kind of gives me the vibe if you've ever seen the Aquabat Super Show, where it's just like, here's everyone the Aquabats know. I get the feeling it's just like the guys behind this, they knew a lot of guys. That's why a lot of the comedians from the circuit were on in the early seasons because like, hey, get our buddy over here. He'll do it for free because we can bully him.
I think there's also something to be said about this particular era of television because we're talking about the MTV era of television. Like this, while the format of Space Ghost Coast to Coast is very much like its own thing, there is information that comes into it from the MTV era. Like we'll see later on, like they're gonna reference Beavis and Butthead, extreme, like full on reference Beavis and Butthead. Like there is something there, and I think that the nature of celebrity at the time, like Bill Clinton was on MTV. Like I think that you can't underestimate what that style was doing for people and either relaunching or helping with certain careers.
I think you're also seeing the sort of the change in technology that allowed these editing shows to become a thing. Because keep in mind, Weird Al had a segment very similar to this on his MTV specials where he would react to a pre-taped interview and mess with the questions. MST3K, which does it 2000, started in '88 on KTMA and was moving to Comedy Central now. You'll see episode 3 of this as just a full MST3K pastiche. But that, again, was that same idea of cutting up old footage and finding it. Because it's now easier because digital editing is a thing. And we've now got all of these cable channels who need content. So they're going to any comedian they can find on the circuit and being like, will you do half an hour of material for us? Whatever it is, as long as it doesn't cost more than the $10 that I have in my pocket, you can have a show.
I mean, there is a lovingly lo-fi, Alex was talking about the rocking guitar earlier, and I mean, if we're talking like lo-fi music, it's just this like screeching, overly distorted guitar riff. But it's
Just
somehow kind of like whenever I hear that riff, there is kind of like a comfort to it, like, oh, it's Space Ghost time.
I love how all the music sounds a bit like
that
Primus, to be fair.
Yeah.
like there's something about because that particular kind of riff, all those power chords that are just heavily distorted and you really can't tell the notes apart too easily, that's also very, very 90s. This is something that could not have been made outside of this era, but for some reason still feels very timeless. And I think that speaks to a lot of the hard work and genuine love that went into this crazy little project that this launched Toonami and Adult Swim. This is the starting point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we should also sort of mention with the two pilots is that how the format was still very wonky for a while. They certainly didn't know, and we'll see throughout this first season that you can definitely tell some of the guests don't understand what's going on very well.
Oh,
So, like
not at all.
in this first episode, in the first pilot, it's all just straight cuts from Space Coast,
Yeah.
the original cartoon. It's not like there's no set, there's no studio. They end by Space Coast saying, "I'm going to lie on the floor," and cut to a clip of him falling over. Pilot 2 introduces the talk show element, but he's on a very Johnny Carson-esque set. And he's sort of being much more Carson-esque. In this second pilot, it's Gary Owen doing the voice.
Yeah.
And obviously, they set up two recurring bits that don't actually come to fruition, one for quite sad reasons. Second episode sets up the idea that Hervé Villechaize will be his co-host, who was Nick Nack in Man with the Golden Gun and was in Fantasy Island. Again, this trend of reruns coming through, which we'll see in season 1, because obviously Fantasy Island was being rerun, but unfortunately Villechaize would die quite tragically before the show aired. But it also set up the idea of LaToya Jackson being cut in as a dancer, which again never comes to fruition. So it's very clear that they still weren't entirely sure what they were doing because, the Carson stuff is dropped entirely by the time the first episode comes around. We're going full sci-fi with it. It's very interesting and very,
But
again, lo-fi and thrown together.
and it speaks to like a 70s aesthetic, like, it's a little more Merv Griffin than like Johnny Carson. But you've still got banter between, not in these first two, but you'll get banter between Space Ghost and like his band leader, which is to say Zorak. And of course, yeah, Moltar and Brack will show up. Sorry, still got Pokemon on the brain. And the I mean, even the set kind of has that kind of retro quiche kind of like this is elongated for no reason, kind of like look to the desk and everything. Um, I mean, the guests even though it never saw the light of day, apparently the guests were like one of them was Emma Thompson, who would have been fresh off like probably a not quite Pride or Sense and Sensibility yet, but certainly the period stuff she was doing right before then. Um, but yeah, that never has seen it exists in text form only now,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Could you imagine if part of your press tour today was being on Space Coast Coast to Coast? Like, could you imagine like the differences that would have to be made to make that happen with modern Hollywood?
I mean, it's just like I'm gonna say his name wrong. The Canadian guy who interviews musicians, Nadawa. This is basically what we have now. You have all those Twitch guys who will go to the interviews purposely to mess with them and do. So I don't think it's. I think Space Ghost was quite forward thinking. The thing that makes Space Ghost weird for a lot of people was the fact that you were talking to someone who wasn't there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
again, we will see in these first episodes. They have not worked out how to seamlessly link those together yet. So a lot of interviewee looking around confused.
Well, like, am I supposed to do this? Like, what am I reacting to?
Who am I
Oh,
speaking to?
I mean, Space Ghost
yeah.
walks, so Philomena Kunk can run and then fall flat on her face in the British Museum.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, without Space Coast, you don't get the Eric Andre show. You don't
Mhm.
get any of the spin-offs, which is to say Harvey Birdman Attorney at Law. You don't get everyone forgets Aqua Teen Hunger Force is technically a Space Ghost spin-off. Um,
yeah.
C-Lab 2021 is basically a repurposing of Hanna-Barbera footage, but not in a talk show format, obviously. Um, yeah, it's bananas how much of Cartoon Network's identity comes from this, all
I,
because they didn't want to. Yeah, and I was the one watching those reruns of everything under the sun that they would have early in the morning or late at night.
I mean, just stylistically as well, without Space Ghost, you don't get Tim and Eric, which I would argue sort of defined the late 2010. You don't get that kind of surrealist anti-humor. You don't get On the Air, which I think is one of Adult Swim's best products because without Space Ghost kind of established that later Cartoon Network isn't going to be a channel that just shows old cartoons. It's going to give people space to do their own thing.
Yeah,
It gives you space.
well, I mean, yeah, it was Space Ghost. Like at this time, you have to keep in mind, and it's something I think that's lost on a lot of people now. 30 years later. At the time, Cartoon Network was basically Boomerang before Boomerang.
Yeah. Like
Um,
I would argue that Space Ghost was the beginning of Cartoon Network having its own real identity, separate from stuff like Nickelodeon or Fox Kids or like all the other kids, like even things like PBS. Like you weren't they didn't have much individual identities yet. Like Nickelodeon ended up getting its around the same time too. Like this is where they're branching apart from each other.
yeah, because it's sometimes when you make your own content, you get to license it and syndicate it out,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of why you start to see channels do their own original content, especially ones that start out repackaging existing shows or movies. That's why AMC started to make its own shows. That's why HBO started to make its own shows. Um, but
Yeah,
it's Space Ghost. It's cool. It's timeless. It's Space Ghost.
and just to go in with
It's
that,
basic.
like again, when we were preparing for this podcast, I got like a load of the old Cartoon Network listings guides, and you can sort of immediately see when Space Ghost starts airing, you start seeing like new appearing next to things because before it was like silly squirrel cartoons are being shown like from the 1956 or 70s era. Just you would see those 4 or 5 times a day because
Yeah.
Cartoon
I
Network
have
was
a
just
vague
whatever's cheap.
No.
I have a vague memory very early on in the running of Space Ghost. Like after Space Ghost, I remember Rocky and Bullwinkle coming on for a short period of time, like Fractured Fairy Tales, shows that my parents grew up with. Like, and it's not that I don't love them, but it's interesting to see that as Space Ghost took more and more market share, essentially, you didn't see stuff like Gumby. I remember being a 2 a.m. show on Cartoon Network for a while, and that was horrifying. But that started to go away and lead into other more horrifying shows, arguably.
Oh, yeah, and it was definitely a thing with the sort of dawn of cable. I think a lot is that channels had to very quickly adapt to being 24 hours because sign-offs was still a thing way into the 2000s for a lot of channels.
Yeah.
They would have a hard time playing the national anthem, then cut to static.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you had this mad run. Now you have all these channels, they all want whatever they can get. So most of them were just buying up anything. If for a lot of people, this is where sort of the Britcom invasion came from that era, because a lot of American networks were like, what go to the BBC, what do you have? We have Faulty Towers we had 10 years ago. We'll buy it. We need something to fill 3 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if there's only 2 seasons. We'll make it work. We'll stretch it out. We'll
Heck,
keep.
we'll get to our old faithful, where even when sort of Toonami starts, what do? They showed the same 36 episodes of Dragon Ball Z on a loop for nearly 2 years.
Oh God. Oh God. We
I've
don't
seen
need to
Raditz
unlock
more times than I've seen my father.
me. Raditz is my older brother.
Dad didn't come back with the cigarettes, but Raditz did.
Raditz came back with the milk. He was here for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing that these two pilots. I'm so sad the second one isn't available.
Yeah.
Apparently, it was just shown to investors or to the network.
Yeah.
But I hope one day someone
Yeah.
digs it up.
Yeah, it was basically, do you have more this like the Denzel Washington thing was fun. Do you have more material? And it's like, of course we do. And they basically it's wild to me that they got the original voice of Space Ghost to do the second pilot. How bananas is that?
That's really
Sometimes you realize that kind of just what was that meeting? Like that character you played like 10 years ago.
Like
Yeah, we
at
want
that
to make
point,
him
like, 25 years ago.
25 years ago.
we want to make him an arrogant drunk. Would you still down for that?
We want him to be Jay Leno, but not Jay Leno exactly.
Yeah.
With a smaller chin.
Yeah.
Arguably.
Can we talk about how great Alex Toth's design is real quick for Space Ghost?
Yes.
It's brilliant. White on black on white, just kind of cowl, Batman with the shaved ears.
Do you ever read the Space Ghost comics?
Yes.
Which one? I mean, there's the one that like Alex Ross did, which is bananas. Uh,
I was talking about the Alex Ross one.
yeah, yeah.
It's bananas. It's insane.
Yeah.
That is a future episode because they did a run of these different comics and they all make zero sense. Like, we're going to treat Space Ghost seriously again. And we're going to hope kids who watch this show buy it and accept that Space Ghost is a serious character with depth. Like,
Yeah.
Those comics are genuinely insane if you read some of them, and a lot of them are worth reading. I like Alex Ross's art a lot, but man, they go wild with it in the comics. It's Game of Thronesy in a lot of ways.
I've thought about buying. I mean, the problem is, not the problem. He's the artist. He gets to choose whatever. But the prints for the Alex Ross prints of Space Ghost are like hundreds of dollars each.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, I love Space Ghost. I think it would be a very interesting, beautiful piece of wall art. I don't know if I'm going to pay like $200 to $300 for a print of a painting.
I mean,
A lot of Alex Ross prints are that expensive these
to be
days,
thematic, you should get a bad photocopy of it and then put that on your wall and say it's a Space Ghost coast to coast print.
I should
Actually.
like a Kinko Xeroxed copy of of that. And I would add my own word balloons in the spirit of Coast to Coast.
Space Ghost. That would be pretty great.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited to go into it. I think all my memories of Space Ghost are later on, so there's definitely this first season is me going, one, who are these people? And two, oh,
Whenever there's a name well, frankly, a lot of these, even with a limited reach and budget, I recognize a lot of them even early on. But like every time you get like just seeing like Conan O'Brien like miserable on Space Ghost Coast to Coast and stuff like that, or Metallica's on like Space Ghost Coast to Coast, it gets wild,
I
guys.
love that episode.
that end, that is my memories of it, is guys like Metallica, guys like Weird Al, guys like Conan, who I think probably because they had more cultural cachet to me, I still knew who they were.
Yeah.
Whereas, Gilligan's Island, I never saw that. So I was like, who are they? Gilligan's Island, I know they reference it on one host segment of Mystery Science Theater, and that's about it.
We're gonna have some fun, guys. I think I was really happy to kind of bring this one to the table. Um, Everybody was all for this one because it's Space Ghost. Just like, as soon as like John mentioned like Sailor Moon, it was like, oh, of course. Like if we're talking foundational anime, it's that, and to a lesser degree, like Gundam, that really sets the stage. We're
Oh,
never gonna
yeah.
we're never gonna talk about Robotech.
We're never going to talk about Robotech.
We'll
Oh,
talk
we
about
we
Robotech.
we have plenty of time, and the list is finite. We'll get there eventually.
We'll get to Robotech
It
eventually.
looms like a shadow above us.
Yeah. But for me, Space Ghost, if you were gonna ever do a show about Toonami and Adult Swim, Space Ghost had to be there, and Space Ghost had to be there like front and center pretty early on. So I think you guys are gonna really dig what we're cooking with the old Coast to Coast because
I'm excited. I feel like I'm going to get a glimpse into your media childhoods here with like a lot of these early figures who I just don't know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's a like I said, to tie it back to the beginning. Um, it was wild to me, not, a 7-year-old kid that wouldn't even get to stay up late, or his parents wouldn't let stay up late. Not that it stopped me on the weekends, but it was like wild to me that Cartoon Network had this like talk show at 11 o'clock on Fridays, but then it became kind of foundational and a fixture really because it was on the air for a long time, guys.
And then it brought us Moltar to bring in Toonami.
Yeah, it all starts here.
Yep.
It all starts here. But it is now time for us to disembark off of the Toonami Absolution train. We have had such a great time talking about Space Ghost. We're going to keep talking about Space Ghost because he's the one who paid for the ship we're riding on. But once again, we have been your hosts. My name is Alyx.
I'm Sam.
And I'm John.
And we'll see you next time. Bang.
Furious discordant guitar riffs.